What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Empowered Athlete Podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Tori Mayson. I came to find her just through Instagram, as I found most of our guest speakers, and that's the beauty of kind of the internet sometimes. And I'm really excited to have her on today because she works specifically with pregnancy and postpartum athleticism. And I obviously get a lot of questions about this, being 9.5 months pregnant. And I thought it was perfect timing to just happen to stumble upon somebody who kind of specializes in that and helping women navigate that part of their life and kind of still find their athleticism and prioritize that even though they're going through this particular life journey. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today, and I'll give you a little bit of information and background on Tori. So she's a personal trainer, lifelong recreational athlete, and pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. She studied exercise and sports science and played lacrosse at the University in Massachusetts. She began her career as a rehab coach in outpatient physical therapy in both the US and the UK, and played and coached lacrosse until the birth of her first son in 2018. Then, after his birth, she recognized a huge gap in the education and support for postnatal athletes. And even as someone whose career was built around rehabilitative type work, she struggled both mentally and physically with her own return to exercise journey, which we'll definitely dive into. So, with support and movement being such a huge part of her identity, she felt that she truly lost a part of herself after becoming a mom. And this is something I know that is very common that I often get. So, I'm excited to dive into this part. Now, 6 years later, with two more boys added to the bunch and multiple pre and postnatal fitness certifications under her belt, she has become the coach that she needed during her own journey. She believes that motherhood should not be the end point to one's athleticism. And I'm so on board with you on that. And that her work focuses on helping women navigate the highs and lows of that journey. So I love this. Thank you so much, Tori, for taking time out of your day to be here with us and share your knowledge. And we're excited to have you. All right, so let's start with just getting people to know more about you. And so let's start by just sharing your transition into motherhood and the struggles you experience. You obviously were a lifelong athlete, and there was a big transition that you had to go through there. So I'd love for you to share your point of view, your experience, your story, and ultimately which led you to do the work that you do today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, as you said, lifelong athlete. I played lacrosse growing up, lots of other sports as well, but that was kind of my love. I played at University of Fitchburg in Massachusetts. And I moved to the UK to coach lacrosse, and I ended up working over here in outpatient physio. So kind of started my career work working in the hospitals, working on the outpatient clinics, the women's health clinics, postnatal wards. So was kind of introduced to like the women's health side of things. And it's really ironic because I was, on the wards kind of teaching Kegels to women and never done them myself, things like that. So, and then I was still playing lacrosse up until when I was pregnant with my first son in 2018. And then, went through that pregnancy feeling like I knew what I was connected to my body. I felt like I could exercise. I felt confident in exercising. And then after I gave birth to him, there was just like this shockwave that went through me, and just everything, kind of changed. And I really struggled for definitely the first few months, if not that first year. And I can happily and easily say this now, but looking back, I definitely struggled with postnatal anxiety, postnatal depression, had a lot of intrusive thoughts, and just really struggled to like let go of control. And I couldn't really, I just felt like I didn't recognize myself. I didn't recognize who this person was of needing such control over everything. And all of my kind of priorities and needs for myself just kind of vanished. And, in that time, I really took on a lot of the kind of mental load, and I felt a lot of resentment to the whole situation, and a lot of like my own needs in terms of like exercise and rehab and that kind of stuff, I just didn't even think about it. I didn't even think it was a thing. And I went to I slowly started to add some exercise back into my routine those early months. And I remember going to my GP asking for a referral because I had like crazy back pain, hip pain. I had lots of pain in my body that I just couldn't get to the bottom of. And as someone who worked in rehab, it was like it felt really hard to be experiencing that and not know what to do. Um, and my GP said that I couldn't be referred to a women's health physio because I wasn't experiencing any incontinence. And so my symptoms weren't kind of severe enough. And so I just thought this is crazy. I've just given birth a few months ago. I need to have some support. And ultimately I, very thankfully was able to go privately. And this is kind of the turning point for me was I went and saw a private women's health physio, and she was able to kind of help me connect to my body a little bit more. And then I just went on like a tangent and went down a rabbit hole of searching for resources. And she kind of like led me down this path of finding courses to take and resources to look at and read and figure out how to rehab my body, quote unquote, rehab my body. Um, and at that point, I started taking these courses and I just became completely obsessed and was just saw such a gap for people who, don't get me wrong, postnatal Pilates, postnatal yoga, baby yoga, these are all amazing things to have. But for someone who played lacrosse as an athlete who wanted to get back to strength training, there was just such a gap there that I just felt like, where do I fit into this and how do I get this back for myself? Um,
So
and so,
tell me, if I can interrupt real quick,
yeah.
tell me a little bit more about the gap specifically that you noticed.
Yeah. So, um, when I went to my healthcare provider to ask for this kind of referral, um, you know, it was just like well, you're not leaking, you're not wetting yourself, so you don't need women's health physio. It was like that's the only thing that they do, and it's not. There's so many other things that they help you with. And it was almost like, well, I need my symptoms to get to that point for someone to kind of, and even when I was, working in the women's health kind of physio clinics, I felt that there was a gap for athletes. Like there was this, you can do the circuit classes and kind of the basic strength training, but what about that shift to, well, I want more than that. I want to compete, or I want to go to a higher level, or I want to be at a certain stage or a certain point for myself. And the gap there was, yes, you can have all these exercises in place, but actually there's a huge mindset shift, and there's a huge range of what you can't do. There's so much nuance to it, if that makes sense. So like, you can, there is no perfect rehab program for everyone. There's no blanket program for everyone, right? That was the gap, is that there is no perfect plan for someone who is having a baby, who's just had a baby, who wants to get pregnant. There is no perfect set plan for somebody to go through from A to B. It's not linear, and there's no set exercise route that's going to guarantee you these outcomes.
Yeah.
It's a mindset shift. It's the right support in place. It's about having the right support there um to understand your body, to connect to your body, to understand what to listen for. As athletes, we are trained and we have been programmed from a young age to be able to ignore what our body is telling us, to push through discomfort, to push through that voice telling you to slow down, to stop. That's just something that as an athlete is ingrained from you from a really young age. And I think in pregnancy, postpartum, it's definitely like this mindset shift of being able to um, learn what you need, learn what support you need, um, and how to listen to your body and what to listen for.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's definitely I agree with that mindset shift. I think that, like you said, in addition to kind of losing the identity, there can be this disconnection with your body, even though there's like a different type of connection that you're having, like growing a baby. There can be this like loss of what I've noticed in clients that I've worked with as well. It's like myself, almost like this shakiness in trust with your body,
Yeah.
especially postpartum, like unsure how to navigate this new body that you kind of have. And there can be that lack of trust, which I think translates into that doubt of like what people are capable of doing.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to fitness and exercise, like I was telling you before this, a lot of people are always asking me, or even just stating and making comments of like, oh, well, I could never do that. Like if I post something, some type of workout, it's like it really comes down to trusting your body, and listening to your body. You're so I believe that we're so much more capable than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah.
And but I mean, it makes perfect sense too that you would be hesitant if you don't have a connection with your body. Because that disconnect is what's going to create that self-doubt and that shakiness. So of course you're not going to push yourself or do an exercise that you aren't sure because you don't have that connection with your body. And that's really the first step to reconnecting in order to develop that trust.
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
about learning about what to look out for, what to listen for, what mean, these symptoms that might come up or these things that happen in pregnancy. It's that none of it's bad. It's just your body trying to say, "Hey, this is what's going on. Maybe this exercise needs to be done a little bit differently or maybe we need to adjust things." And this is where having the right support system in place is really beneficial, and having, you know, it's if you love movement and you love a certain type of movement, love a sport, it's not about completely stopping that. And I think this is where the messaging out there in the world of social media and whatnot can be really tricky. Is it can kind of put us into these two categories of like, there's so much fear mongering around a diastasis or prolapse or whatever it might be, and there's a lot of fear around it, so we just stop movement or we stop it all together. But there's also the other end of the extreme of like, just listen to your body, do what you've always done. And, if you don't have the right awareness of what of things to look out for and things to recognize in your body, you're kind of at like these two ends of the extremes, right? Of like, just carry on with no core pelvic health kind of considerations in place. And I think there's somewhere in the middle, depending on your experience, your fitness level, the support that you've got in place. Like there's somewhere in the middle that you fall, that your sport of choice or exercise of choice or whatever, where you end up on that kind of spectrum.
Yeah. I think support is so important. And unfortunately, I mean, I can't really say that I really had support. I just felt like at the end of the day, like, which I think maybe I could be an anomaly as far as trusting myself. I've been working many years on developing trust in myself. And that's one thing. My issue in life has always been trusting other people, not myself.
Yeah.
So for trusting me, I could do that. But it's
Yeah.
a lot of like I felt like I didn't have a support system because of my high level of athleticism. A lot of people weren't in that same boat and didn't have that same experience. So it was so easy for them to just say, don't do this or don't do
Yeah.
that. A lot of
Absolutely.
people ask me, what did your care provider tell you in regard to doing jujitsu? I was like, I didn't tell them
No.
because if they don't do jujitsu, they're just going to tell me not to because they just say it's a combat sport, don't do it.
Yeah.
Like there's so much more, like you said, nuance. I was like, I've been doing this for 13 years. I know my body. I trust my body. I'm advanced in the sport. I know how to move. So just to tell somebody not to do it completely, who
Yeah.
doesn't even do the sport, to give me real feedback and like, if somebody was a black belt and they had the experience of going through pregnancy and gave me some feedback, I would be more open to listening because they have that experience. But for
Yeah.
somebody who just has a medical degree and does nothing about jujitsu,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but your opinion doesn't hold that much weight.
Yeah.
I'd rather talk to somebody who's a pregnant, mom,
Yeah.
who does the sport because they understand the nuance of that sport. Another thing I feel was like that I had personally experienced as far as feedback from people or unsolicited advice was like, okay, don't lift weights. I'm like, you guys know what kind of weights I lift. Like I do kettlebells, I do explosive movements. You're telling me for 10 months not to lift a weight. Like,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah.
Like
That's
at
so
some point,
short-sighted
it's gonna
because
stop.
also from from the day you give birth, you have a mini weight that you're going to be carrying around. And every day that mini weight is going to get heavier and heavier and heavier,
Yeah.
hopefully. And so,
Yep.
it's like that is so short-sighted, like to
Yeah.
say for the next 9, 10 months, whatever, like don't lift weights.
Yeah.
you know, you are literally going to be carrying a weight with you. It's going to be attached to your hip for like, you know, and if you've got
That
other kids,
fear, like
like,
you said, like the fear, other people projecting their own fear,
yes,
and also like their own experience that they're kind of maybe trying to very innocently give you advice, but it's
yeah,
based off what they believe they're capable of.
yeah,
And that's why it's so dangerous to just take the weight of other people's opinions, and
yeah,
apply it to your own journey because you're discounting your entire experience and just listening to somebody who has a completely different experience, maybe pregnancy experience, health experience,
yeah.
relationship with their body, and they're just telling you based off what their own belief is, and then you're just going to follow that. That's not very accurate for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is where building yourself like a little team for your like pregnancy postnatal care of like-minded people of people that will help support you to your goals, whether that's just getting back to the gym, getting back to your, whatever class you want to go to, or getting back on the mat to compete. Like having the system in place to help support you with that is so important. And I think we spend so much time gifting out to moms like baby grows and all these kind of like baby gifts, and actually what we could be doing for moms is just setting up this really great system where we can support them to get back to their goals.
I love that. I love that. I wanted to transition and go back a little bit about the part of your own journey of which I also had experience with is like losing part of your identity in kind of becoming a mom, especially like becoming a new mom. Um, and I'm just curious how you personally navigated that. One of the things that came up for me as you were sharing like this idea of like losing control, it makes that like I really resonated with that because of being a lifelong athlete myself. One of the things that is embedded in us at such a young age is like that structure,
Yeah.
right? That structure. And I feel like that's one of the things that goes out the window until we create it again,
Yeah.
having a newborn, because there's so much just unknown and things that are unpredictable that the structure that we were so used to as athletes
Yeah.
can't exist in the same way. Although structure can still be there, it just can't exist in the same way. And when we hold on to the way it used to be and try to bring it into this new experience, it creates a lot of frustration. And I
Absolutely.
speak from my experience too, until I was like, what does structure need to look like for me right now in my life?
Yeah.
Not what it used to look like, because that's not going to happen anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the theme with a lot of this stuff is zooming out to the big picture, right? We need to, like, this is a very short season of life. When you're in it, it feels like forever. The days feel so long and it can feel really challenging. And like you said, when you're so used to having a certain, level of structure in your life, to kind of lose that feels so overwhelming. But being able to recognize it, I think awareness is like massively helpful in that kind of first step of trying to find peace in this kind of state, in this situation. Um, so this awareness, and zooming out and just recognizing that, I want to be 60 years old and I want to be still moving in a way that I find joy in. And whether that's, whatever sport it is at the time that I love, like that's how I want to be moving. And I want that to carry on until my later days. And so for right now, when you're in the thick of it, it's that zooming out, recognizing that this is such a short season of life, and actually finding ways that you can still happen and get little doses of whatever it is you need in terms of exercise, in terms of jujitsu, or dance or whatever it is to keep that fire lit in you, and finding like what's the minimum dose of that I need to keep it like lit and to keep me still attached to it. Um and but still kind of works within what my family needs. And I think that's hard. That's a really hard thing to do. And I can say that now looking back 6 years, I can say that. But I wish going into that I'd had a better understanding of the kind of mindset shift that I needed to make.
Yeah.
Um, because that was, I think that's where it all kind of changed for me, was just being able to accept that like workouts were going to look really different. Like um, they weren't going to be as long or maybe as hard as I wanted. I was going to have to maybe adapt to the situation I was in that day, the energy levels that I had that day, and respecting the energy that I had, respecting that, my child needs me at the end of the
Yeah.
day. Respecting that my husband needs me at the end of the day, that my family, that's, there has to be a balance there. And that comes down to mindset. That
I love.
really.
Yeah, there was a word that you said that actually was something I wanted to speak to because it was the key part, and I also wanted to share kind of what you're speaking to is a kind of mantra that really carried me through as well, and it's the same exact principle, but it was just kind of like a quote or mantra, whatever it was, and it's do what you can with what you have in the season you're in. And this is
Mhm.
something I'm constantly like telling people, like my clients and stuff. And the other aspect of that is acceptance, which is what you said. Like you just needed to accept. And that is really the key. So the first step, like you said, it's like awareness. And then the next step is acceptance. Acceptance
Absolutely.
of where you're at, because if you're not accepting where you are, you're not living in the experience of that. Like you're focused on the future or what isn't, and you're not really enjoying the enrichment that can happen in the present moment by being, with your kid and just experiencing those things because your mind is just somewhere else except there. And one of the things that kind of again is another, I love mantras that kind of just help me so I can like chant when I notice those thoughts wanting to come up. Um, and for me, it's acceptance is the cure to acceptance to what is the cure to frustration of what isn't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whenever I feel frustrated, I know 100% I'm not accepting something in the present moment,
Yeah.
because frustration for me is only coming from literally latching onto something that isn't yet here. So like
Yeah.
it forces me to shift into like, what can I be more grateful for? What can I be more accepting of in this moment? And working with the reality of where I'm at right now.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. But so that couldn't fit more into
Yeah, when you were explaining
that
that like encompassed like that quote for me. Like, so I had the same experience.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
So is there anything other than the support as far as advice for helping moms balance the life and the mom life and the athlete life? Like maybe certain structures or protocols you did put in place once you kind of found your ground a little bit, like routines or like you said, you kind of said doing what you can with what you have or what's available based off your energy levels, things like that. Like maybe that's the piece of advice, or if there's something else that you found helpful in your own journey.
Yeah. I think what I found most helpful, I think there was a big turning point and I think I've already touched on this, but like that awareness. So when I started to actually feel like I was aware of what I needed, I
Mm.
think when you're in it, and you know I really struggled to like figure out what I needed. My husband would constantly say, well, what can I do to help you? What can I do? Just I don't know. And
Yeah.
actually what I needed was some, protected time for me to do exercise, or protected time for me to study so that I could learn more about this stuff,
Yeah.
protected time that I could do these things. And that's not, it's not always possible. He was working full time. So it was nap times. It was
Yeah.
when, once he'd gone to bed or on the weekends. Like there was a lot of just trying to fit it into these places throughout the day and the week that I could. But I think once we had those conversations and I recognized what I needed, I think that was a big thing, was I needed to actually recognize what I needed. Um, and that, for me, that was, I needed this protected time to exercise. I needed a sport again that lit a fire in me. I needed something that I felt passionate about. Um, and then it was communication. So figuring out, how do we fit that in?
Yeah.
Um, and
Love
how
that.
do I rebuild that into our week? And for a period, so I I started jujitsu a year ago. I'm only 1 year into my journey. And so when I first started, it was, Monday nights. I can train on a Monday night. And that was it. And I had to accept that was it. But that was like so precious to me. And that lit a fire, that lit that athlete in me again. Like I found that inner athlete again. And, you know, because we were able to communicate and figure that out as a couple, we were able to protect that Monday night. And, if there isn't a partner there, it's finding what you need and getting a babysitter or getting family or getting friends in to support you. And then, going from there, after a year, it was like, okay, well, maybe we could fit in another day. So I could do 2 days a week because actually I need more.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's time, it's patience, it's communication, um, and being okay with only it being a little. So like those early days, like 10 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna do a 10-minute workout on my kitchen floor with a dumbbell, you know, and that has
In there so
yeah.
much like I
And
want to get a good workout in. My whoop is in the green today. And then like just based off the way it's unfolding, I'm just like, my like minimum, I call it a minimum viability. Like, what is the minimum viability I need today to just say that I showed up for myself, even if it's not in the way that I
yeah,
potentially wanted to show up for myself. And sometimes I just do 100 kettlebell swings. I know that still sounds like a lot for some people, but like I'm like, I don't need anything other than the space of my body. I have a
yes,
kettlebell, and then while my son's playing with his toys, I'm literally swinging the belt in the house.
yeah.
If I end up doing more, I do more. But like for me, I'm like, okay, I did that. So
And
that's
it's so funny because those early days when you're first trying to figure out how to fit this stuff into your routine, you are the sum of your habits. So I think 5 minutes, if you commit to a week of 5 minutes of movement a day, you'd be, it'd be really funny to look at the next week and maybe it's 10 minutes a day. Like you'd be surprised how much it builds up and how much you then become motivated for it to become more of your routine. And I think that was it for me, is like finding something that lit that fire in me again, then really built motivation for something, for more. And it
100.
was finding what worked.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So I know that you said there's no blanket statement, it's very individualized, and we kind of talked about this, but based off your experience and maybe the certifications that you have, are there specific exercises that are recommended during pregnancy and postpartum to accelerate the recovery process, and ones that like can worsen it? Like for instance, don't know if this is really true because my midwife with my first son, she wasn't like a fitness specialist, but she basically told me not to do planks because of the gravity that can kind of cause separation. I had many other exercises I could do. So I was like, okay, great. And I did have a really bad diastasis recti the first one because all I was doing was push-ups and planks because I thought I had to kind of scale back my exercise
Yeah.
first. So I was like, okay, I'll just do push-ups and planks. And I did 2 minutes of plank and 200 push-ups every day. And she was like, what the hell are you doing? Your diastasis recti, like this was my first, it was like just entering my second trimester. And she's like, and it was my first child.
Yeah.
And she's like, your diastasis recti is like, you are a mom for the third time. She's like,
Oh,
what in the world are you doing? It was like 3 inches wide, 3 fingers wide. And I was like, I'm just doing push-ups and planks. I'm doing like nothing.
yeah.
And she's like,
Oh, okay.
well, all the gravity is pushing your walls apart. So you got to switch to something else.
Yeah.
So I don't know like the science behind that. It made sense, but I was curious on your thoughts and
Yeah.
based on your experience of certain must avoid and exercises and stuff.
Absolutely. So yeah, so a diastasis is when, your six pack muscles, your the rectus abdominis muscles in the front of your abdomen. It's where the connective tissue down the middle stretches and widens. And so there's so much fear around diastasis because people think my abs have ripped apart and they're never going to be back to normal. And actually, there's a lot of research now that shows that it's not so much about the gap between the two muscles, and it's more about the tension that you can create along the midline of your linea alba, that tissue down the middle. So being able to create tension is more important, I say in quotes, than the gap there. And so I think when it comes to like, let's hone in on a diastasis for a minute, and then I'll back up to pregnancy. But for a diastasis, that tissue is lengthening or stretching and widening. And so yeah, we want to avoid exercises that put a lot of strain on that tissue. So if you imagine in a plank position and you've got bump and baby placenta, all the fluid in your tummy kind of pushing down into that. So it's not a great position to be in, but it's not something that you completely need to avoid. There are other ways of doing it. You can take a plank into a more elevated position, so it's not as much force going out into the linea alba. And then we also want to look at things like, well, how are we breathing and how are we creating tension in within our abdominals to support that movement? What's our alignment like, or our positioning like? So there's so many factors that go into a movement that make it safe or unsafe. So a
Mhm.
plank, we could say a full on the ground plank is really uh, isn't an ideal position to be in, especially if you're breathing into your belly, you're not connected to your abdominals, your back is really arched, and then that's not an ideal position. But we could change that scenario, and we could look at some different strategies that you're using, adjust that movement a little bit, and then it's absolutely fine. You might reach 30 weeks pregnant and that changes, and then we need to look at it again. And then you might reach 32 weeks and maybe you can't really keep those same strategies in place and we need to change it again. So it really is about um the person. I know that's an annoying response, that it kind of is person dependent, but you know it's hard to tell someone don't do X, Y, and Z without physically seeing them do it. Um, but we generally, with a diastasis, we want to avoid that outward pressure. We need to think about how we're breathing. We need to think about our alignment. We need to think about tension and things like that. So it
Okay,
really,
that's and I think one of the other maybe things that comes up often, or at least I've heard it, is what about jumping? And that's like during pregnancy, probably more so during pregnancy, postpartum, like you could jump, jump squats,
yeah,
things like that. But that was one thing, like again, as soon as I transitioned from more of the planks and push-ups, excuse me, I kind of did jump rope and kettlebell swings and jump squats. Those were things. And again, of course, some of the fear mongering advice I got was like, "You're shaking the baby," and I was like, I don't know if that's true or not. Luckily, my baby came out great, and he's really healthy and smart. But
yeah.
I was kind of like, hopefully, you're good in there.
No, yeah. There are, the there's a lot of jumping that you can do, and it comes down to this: can I versus should I? And there's no danger in jumping with a baby. Now, that being said, you have to look at like, what's your medical history. If there's no,
Yeah.
if you're not bleeding, or you don't have any issues with your placenta, or you don't, you want to look at your overall health and advice from your doctor and your midwives around how your pregnancy is going. But if you're in a relatively healthy pregnancy, there's no complications, then running, jumping, doing things more dynamic is okay. However, I will say that is a lot of pressure of that weight of baby, fluid, placenta, all these things on your pelvic floor. So when
Yeah.
we're thinking about our long-term pelvic health, um, some people it's fine for, but others may experience some symptoms, or may experience leaking, and it could contribute to your pelvic floor, yeah, just being a little uh, weakened from all of that impact.
Love that consideration. Yeah, that was something that I didn't really think
Yeah.
about. I'll see how it goes with my second one. The first one was pretty good. Like as far as postpartum, like jumping, things like that. Never like jumping on the trampoline. I know that's usually an issue for people jumping on the trampoline or jump rope, jumping jacks. Those kind of like get a little leakage from some people that have talked to me, but I didn't have any of that. The only time I full disclosure and transparency and TMI probably, but just one time at some point postpartum, I was on a trampoline park and I had never done a split in the air,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
since pregnancy. And I did that and completely peed myself. Luckily, I was wearing black leggings and I just started cracking up. I was just like, okay, I guess that's my limit.
I think
um,
that this is also it. Is kind of finding that symptom threshold, right? So if
yeah,
you
yeah.
are leaking, but say running is like your thing, okay? And you love running and that is your outlet, or you want to compete, or you have a race coming up or whatever. Find how far you can manage, and
Yeah.
find think about your breathing, your positioning, all these things, but also thinking about how far can you manage before you start to experience the leaking or whatever. Um, and it might be that you train within that threshold, right? You can do 50 double unders, or 50 jumping jacks. But once you get to 51, that's when you start to leak, right? Or you start to feel like you don't have as much control. And you train within a range that you feel like you have that control of.
Mm,
So symptom threshold is definitely something that I look at with clients, especially returning to exercise. Is okay, where can we train to before we start to feel that kind of start to feel any of those symptoms? And then how can we build up that capacity? Now, a lot of the times with more dynamic movements, jumping, running, anything like that, it's it could potentially be that we have an overactive pelvic floor, that our pelvic floor is actually struggling to be more dynamic. We don't want our pelvic floor, and I'm showing my hand here in like a cupping position. We don't want our pelvic floor to be tight all the time. So if we're constantly contracting our pelvic floor up here, if we're running, holding a pelvic floor contraction or kegling while we run, and that pelvic floor isn't able to give, then it's going to get really tired after a certain amount of time. So like if you imagine if you imagine my arm in like a bicep curl here, and I'm holding my bicep in this position and I'm doing my curls here, and I'm never letting that muscle completely relax.
yeah.
If I'm holding it here all day long and then I put something on, like my kid jumps on my arm, or I put a really heavy bag on my arm, it's going to give. Same thing with your pelvic floor. If you're constantly contracting your pelvic floor all the time, and then you go and jump on a trampoline or try and go for a run, your pelvic floor is going to give and it's not going to be able to support its functions.
Mm.
So learning to down train, completely relax your pelvic floor, work that floor through its full range of motion is really important when it comes to more dynamic and impact work.
I love that. Cool. That's great, great advice. So you kind of spoke to it, but I'm curious if there are other specific kind of like wrapping this up as far as the protocols that you have in place when working as a postpartum
Yeah.
athletic coach. Like, how does your process work if somebody was to come to you? What I'm sure it's gathering medical history and things like that, but like, what is your process like?
Yeah. So when someone comes to me, what no matter where they are in their journey, whether they're 6 weeks postpartum, a year postpartum, um, we are always starting with that core kind of connection and breath work. So we're looking at breathing, breath dynamics, so how they're breathing, how they're managing pressure. So our core is really shortly, it's made up of our diaphragm on top, pelvic floor on the bottom, abdominal muscles that wrap around our midsection. And within that core canister, we manage pressure. And so for me, I'm talking, my intra-abdominal pressure is more right now. If I cough or sneeze, those are all spikes in intra-abdominal pressure. And so in order to manage prolapse, manage diastasis, get back to higher intensity exercise or just get back to any sort of exercise, we need to be able to manage pressure within that core system. And so anyone that comes to me, we are starting out by looking at that system and looking at how that person manages their pressure and what their kind of movement tendencies are like and how that reflects their intra-abdominal pressure management. And then we build from there. And then it truly is a progressive overload of exercise from there. And we, again, keep nudging to where we then feel like either that symptom threshold or where there's that kind of pressure leak, if you will. And we just try and build strength and capacity as we go. So it's a lot of breath work and connection work at the beginning, and then we're finding ways to progressively overload them in a way that supports their athletic goals, but also looks at the longevity of their athleticism. Like I said before, like we want to be doing this when we're 60 years old. This isn't like a here and now and just our athleticism right now. We want this to be a lifelong thing. And so, everything we do is kind of with core pelvic health in consideration.
Love that. And so what is the best way for athletes to connect with you? And maybe even some jujitsu athletes? Is that something that you've been interested in working with some jujitsu women now that you're in the world?
I, I'd love to. I think all of it can be applied to any sport. And so I may not be the most experienced in a sport, but I am always able to look at the sport and how how they move, and all of it can be applied. So yeah, you can connect with me on Instagram, which is tori.mason.coach, or email, which is tori.mason@gmail.com. Yeah, any way by that is good. And I do remote coaching online, which is easy enough as well.
Awesome. I'll make sure that your information is in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your story. And I know there's a lot of gold nuggets in here. And I think I think that a lot of the listeners, female listeners, are going to just feel a lot of relief around, um, what you had said, just with the idea of like listening to your body and not having like the fact there isn't something cookie cutter, that like it really is nuanced and customized, and giving them like that permission to kind of find what works for them and that they don't have to fit a certain mold. I think that will give women just a lot of ease. And then again, if you guys want, more of that custom support, because that was a big element to what we were talking about, just having that support system, which is important regardless of having a kid, but even more so, having a new kid and transitioning into motherhood for sure. And just wanting to have the best of both worlds, which is to be an athlete still and be a mom, because I do believe that you get to have both. Like she said, it's not the end point to your journey. You get to have both. But I do think that just having that support is really important to be able to find what that's going to look like for you. So definitely make sure that you go follow Tori so you can just get more of her content online. If you have questions, shoot her a DM or email. And if there's anything that you want to share that you really took away that you want to share on social media and tag us, please feel free to do as always. And Tori, again, thank you for being here.
Thank you so
And
much
sharing
for having
knowledge.
me. Thank you so much. This has been great.